This video is brought to you by the Great Courses Plus, a subscription on-demand video learning service where you can enjoy lectures and courses from top professors from around the world. More on the Great Courses Plus and how you can enjoy a free trial later in the video. Vampires conquer death, drinking the blood of the living and possessing awesome supernatural powers. Throughout the centuries, they have been described as both suave figures and mindless, animalistic zombies, creatures of the night who have long occupied a position of dread fascination within culture, with thousands of books, television shows, and films created about them. Stepping outside the realms of fiction, is there any truth behind the legend of the vampire? In 1924, the British occult researcher and author Ralph Shirley wrote that vampirism was perhaps more commonplace than was commonly supposed. It was to lunatic asylums, he claimed, that suspected vampires were consigned, thus limiting the public's awareness of what he considered to be an active and modern threat. Several years later, in 1949, such a case of vampirism did indeed reach the public ear in the UK, when a man named John George Haigh confessed to not only ending the life of 9 people, but of being sustained by their blood. When asked about his motivations for committing such terrible acts, he described a dream to his prison psychiatrist. "I saw before me a forest of crucifixes, which gradually turned into trees. At first there appeared to be dew or rain dripping from the branches, but as I approached, I realized it was blood." As Haigh stepped closer in the dream, the whole forest supposedly began to writhe, and the trees, dark and erect, to ooze blood. Haigh watched on as a man went from each tree, catching the blood. When the cup was full, he approached me. "Drink," he said, but I was unable to move. The dream vanished, but I still felt faint and stretched out with all my strength towards the cup. When tried, the court found Haigh guilty of having taken the lives of 6 people. Far from pleading his innocence, he adamantly stated that there had in fact been 9. His thirst, he claimed, was unable to be sated. Haunted by the hands holding out the cup, which he had first seen in his dream, he was consumed by a terrible thirst. The thirst, he stated, was unknown to any other modern man and had never left him despite his increasing number of victims. Haigh claimed to have been dominated by dreams of blood as a young boy, with them returning to him in 1944 after a car accident. His sanguine nights turned into bloody days as he convinced his victims to come to a secluded area where he would end them and then drink their blood before placing them into a container of sulfuric acid. Once the body turned to sludge, it was easier to dispose of. Naturally, with the remains being so dissolved and thus unable to be fully examined, the court at the time had to rely upon Haigh's testimony regarding the truthfulness of his vampiric ritual. It is for this very reason that the validity of his account has been put into question. Whilst it is certain that Haigh took the lives of many, some have suggested that he invented having drank human blood in order to be declared insane and spared capital punishment. During the trial, he even drank his own urine to help his case. However, he had been in prison before and was known to be a career fraudster. As such, many believed and still believe that his heinous crimes were encouraged more by a financial rather than a cult reason. He was known to have sold his victims' belongings, with the timings of his crimes matching his own financial troughs. However, he stubbornly refuted this assessment of his crimes, even admitting to more acts of vampirism than the court was able to prove. Why would someone claim such horrors if they were not indeed consumed by an insatiable thirst? For many researchers, including the author Basil Copper, the answer is clear. Haigh was indeed a bloodthirsty fiend. Writing in the early 1970s, he declared that after having sifted through masses of statements made at the time, there was no doubt in his mind that Haigh was a malformed human being, a vampiric predator whose thirst for blood was slaked on at least 6 occasions post-mortem. In the 16th century, the town of Pench in the region of Silesia in Eastern Europe was allegedly plagued by an abominable being. The people of the town believed that the creature was their own recently deceased resident, Johannes Conscius. The remarkable tale is reported on in An Antidote Against Atheism, a book published by the English philosopher Henry More in 1655. More describes Conscius as having been a highly regarded and wealthy man, who had served as an alderman for his town. Amongst his many possessions were 5 strong horses which he kept in his stables. One day he and a servant were attempting to shoe one of the horses when he received a mortal blow from the horse's hoof. Death did not come easily to the alderman. He is reported to have suffered for many nights, repeatedly yelling, "Woe is me, how do I burn, and am all on fire." At his terminal hour, he complained of his sins, and how he was due to suffer for them, sins which he exclaimed were bigger than all the sins of the world besides. Some in the area speculated that Conscius had made a pact with the devil. They whispered that shortly before he had become wealthy, he had had a son who subsequently disappeared. This child, it was rumoured, had been sold to the devil. Conscius's injury and incipient illness were fatal, consuming him in the middle of the night. At the moment of his passing, his eldest son supposedly witnessed a black cat rush into the room and scratch at the dying man's face, as though in an attempt to remove his body from this world. No sooner had the animal left, the man breathed his last. That cat would allegedly be amongst the first of his victims. As a wealthy and highly regarded local resident, Conscius's friends and family paid large sums of money for him to be buried within the holy ground of the church, besides the altar, in the hope of nulling some of his sins. This, it is said, did not work. Local people became concerned when spots of blood appeared on the church cloth which hung over his grave. Several soon testified to having heard rambunctious noises coming from his home. Cows were reported as having been found dead, sucked dry, with all the blood from their bodies gone. Chickens were similarly discovered. Some residents even attested to having seen their deceased neighbour gallop through the town on a horse. Before too long, the reports and sightings became more worrying. A wagoner, with whom the alderman had a personal quarrel with in life, reported being assaulted by Conscius, even claiming that the dead man had bit him. Women reported being touched by him inappropriately. The people of the town suffered these assaults for months, and were convinced that they were being plagued by the undead alderman. Thus, they decided to open the tomb where he had been laid to examine his corpse. It is said that they found his body to be perfectly preserved, even reporting that his eyes would open and shut as though he were blinking, and that his hands could grasp a staff tightly when put in them. It seemed that their suspicions had been proven correct. He was indeed a vampire, and thus his corpse must be consigned to the flames. However, despite being lit upon a pyre, the alderman's body was reluctant to be burnt. In the end, the executioner had to hack it to pieces, so that the fire could more easily devour his flesh. With his body burnt, the assaults are reported as having diminished. So, was Johannes Conscius an undead vampire? Many at the time were convinced. Skeptics, on the other hand, may consider this case to be a dismissible piece of folklore conjured up by illiterate peasants. Equally, a more disturbing explanation could be argued for, that Conscious, far from being a vampire, was actually still alive, sent into a coma after being hit by his horse. Being placed in a church tomb rather than being buried beneath the soil, there may have been enough ventilation to keep him oxygenated and alive after his presumed passing. After he was found in such a state and declared an unnatural abomination, a series of fantastical stories could have either been invented or misattributed. Whatever the case, vampire or not, the same miserable conclusion was ultimately reached for poor Conscious: a butchering upon a burning pyre. Ultimately, the truth of the matter is unclear. What is certain is that Conscious was not the only one claimed to be a vampire in history. At around the turn of the 19th century, the French Revolution temporarily disenfranchised much of the French nobility. According to author Jesse Middleton, writing in 1915, there was one nobleman, the Viscount de Maurièvre, who, after struggling to stay alive during the Revolution, had bloody vengeance in his heart when he regained power. One by one, the peasants who had served him were brought before him. By the time they left his chamber, their heads were no longer connected to their bodies. A fitting punishment, he no doubt thought, for the peasants who had done much the same during their revolution. The nobleman's tyranny quickly became intolerable. Fearing the loss of their own heads, the peasantry rebelled and assassinated him. According to the reported account, it soon became apparent that this was not the end of de Maurièvre, for as soon as he was buried, children began to be found lifeless, with the mark of the vampire upon their throats. These mysterious deaths are said to have continued for 72 years, until the grandson of the Viscount decided to investigate the incidents. After much discussion, it was decided that his tomb should be reopened, so as to examine his corpse. What they found was shocking. Far from showing the expected natural signs of decomposition, the nobleman's body was supposedly found quite fresh and free from decomposition. His face was flushed and there was blood in the heart and chest. The skin was soft and natural. Terrified by this unnatural discovery, a stake was promptly hammered through his heart. This, it is said, provoked the alleged vampire to groan loudly before expiring. His corpse was then burned by the sea. Afterwards, no more mysterious crimes were reported in the area. It has become a well-known theory that Bram Stoker's Dracula was inspired by the savage Wallachian warlord Vlad the Impaler. However, there may have been another inspirational vampiric figure located much closer to home for the Irish-born author, the legendary Auertach. In Ireland, it is said that even until this day, locals will not approach the ancient grave of Auertach, which is marked by a large stone located in a field near Garver in North Derry. Yet, to call it a grave would not be true to legend, for that implies it serves as a final resting place for the dead. Whilst it may be his final resting place, Auertach, according to folklore, is still very much alive. The large and heavy stone, as well as marking his location, supposedly serves an additional purpose: to trap Auertach under its weight, and thus prevent him from rising again to feast on the living. In the 5th and 6th centuries AD, the Glenulin Valley, where the tomb is located, was carved out amongst many different Irish chieftains. Auertach was one of the warlords who dominated the valley, and he ruled as a tyrant, oppressing his people for his own nefarious needs. In legend, he is described as a dwarf who delved into the occult so as to become a powerful wizard. Awatak had a penchant for cruelty. For years, his subjects gave in to his harsh demands. They were too afraid of his dark powers to question him. Eventually, however, they could stand his evil deeds no longer, and so invited another chieftain, Kahan, to come and slay him. Despite Awatak's dark powers, Kahan was able to overthrow him. The invading chieftain afterwards paid his adversary the respect accorded to any chieftain by having him buried standing up. Yet Awatak was unwilling and indeed perhaps unable to find peace in the afterlife. He soon rose from his grave and demanded a tax be paid by his subjects. He demanded their blood in order to sustain his vile corpse. Kahan once again killed Awatak, but to no avail, for he had become an immortal blood-drinking fiend. Kahan, confused by the phenomenon, went to consult a wise man, thought to be either a druid or a local Christian holy man. The evil Awatak is not dead, he was told. According to the wise man, the tyrannical chieftain could not be killed. His magical powers had made it so that he could live on forever as the walking dead, sustained by the blood of the living. The man then told Kahan what he needed to do. He must kill Awatak once more, bury him upside down, surround the gravesite with thorns, and then place a large stone on top of where he was buried. Kahan dutifully obeyed, even going so far as to build a sepulchre over the undead creature. This episode in local history was dramatic enough to give the townland its name, Slortavate, or Awatak's grave. Before we discuss our final case, if you want to know more about the literary character of Dracula, then I suggest taking a look at Dr. Shippey's fascinating lecture available on the Great Courses Plus. Dr. Shippey examines the character of Dracula in depth and illustrates how the modern view of the vampire took shape in culture. The Great Courses Plus has an extensive library of over 11,000 video lectures from professors from the Ivy League and other prestigious universities, as well as from experts from places like the Smithsonian and National Geographic. By using my link in the description, you can access all of this courtesy of a free trial. So if you would like to watch the lecture I did, you can go ahead and do so. Dr. Shippey's enthusiastic lecture is highly engaging and will leave you wanting more from his lecture series. And if you would like to learn about something else, then the Great Courses Plus will undoubtedly inspire you just by visiting their homepage, with lectures and courses on everything from science to food to photography to mathematics. There truly is no better place on the internet if you enjoy learning. The Great Courses Plus provides an Ivy League education at your convenience, without the pressure of exams and deadlines. And as I said, you can try it all free, and in doing so show support for my channel. Just go to thegreatcoursesplus.com/paranormal scholar or click the link in the description. In the summer of 1996, a female freelance journalist named Susan Walsh disappeared from her home in New Jersey. Many believe that the cause of her vanishing had something to do with her investigation of New York's vampire subculture. Walsh's disappearance inspired the writer and professor of forensic psychology, Catherine Ramsland, to write a book called Piercing the Darkness. For her research, she personally involved herself in the vampire subculture which Walsh had attempted to investigate. Her book ultimately concluded that the subculture was mostly a type of harmless role-playing phenomenon where people from all walks of life could find escapism in a vampiric underworld. Yet, during her investigation, there were disturbing incidents reported to her that were not harmless at all. Included in this were claims of secretive cults of vampires who performed abominable rituals deep in the countryside. One such cult was alleged to worship an ascendant vampiric spirit known as Christian. Christian, it was reported to her, was fundamentally a blood-drinking psychopath. He liked the taste of blood she was told of the now deceased vampire. He thought it was the closest he'd ever get to God. Ramsland was first told about Christian by a man who called himself Wraith. He alleged to have been Christian's lover when he was alive. Wraith freely admitted to having engaged in the seduction or forcible capture of men with Christian in order to violate them and sate their bloodlust. Wraith's descriptions of his and Christian's sanguine pastimes were explicit. Sometimes their vampiric encounters would end in lives being taken. He enjoyed the taste of blood, Wraith told Ramsland. Supposedly, the sensation of quivering muscle and nerve between his teeth was an elevated experience. Wraith explained to Ramsland that Christian became obsessed with the idea of a glorious exit, to end his own life in such a manner that he would become a powerful vampiric spirit, bonded spiritually to Wraith. Wraith claimed that Christian's great scheme had become reality, with him now being possessed by the spirit of Christian. "I feel him, I'm haunted by him," Wraith is recorded as having told Ramsland. At night, the spirit of Christian supposedly came to Wraith in order to direct him in the hunt. Through this spiritual connection, the undead Christian was supposedly able to continue committing terrible, blood-soaked acts. Whilst Wraith was the one who claimed to be personally bonded to Christian, there were many others said to have worshipped the vampire and what he did in life. Ultimately, Ramsland was not able to discover how Susan Walsh disappeared. The journalist was never found, and so her fate remains unclear. The author did, however, claim to have uncovered the secrets of an underground movement, populated by people who believe in and actively pursue the power of blood. If what her book claims is true, then the vampire is a reality. Whilst the vast majority of modern vampires may practice their beliefs responsibly and within the boundaries of the law, there are those who are claimed to walk a darker path, committing heinous acts away from the scrutiny of established morality on unwilling participants. As for her interview with Wraith, Ramsland has stated that she has never been able to conclude why he confessed so many crimes to her. Either he wanted to be in a book, or he actually took people's lives to sate his vampiric thirst. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and subscribe if you have not done so already. Be sure to click the bell icon so you receive a notification each time I upload a new video. Don't forget, you can also follow me, Laura Roughton, on social media at Laura E. Roughton for more paranormal content, articles, photographs, and musings. And if you cannot wait until my next video, why not check out the one suggested on screen now? Until next time.